In a video entitled Truth in Atheist-Theist Debate, Professor Anton responds in part to my video, Eskimos and Atheism. My Eskimos and Atheism video was a response to his video entitled Why I Am Not an Atheist. Links to all three videos can be found in the underbar. Professor Anton says that he was, quote, put off, end of quote, by the Eskimo analogy I gave because it, quote, could not be further from his position, end of quote. He claims that he was not appealing to some kind of totality in addition to the things that are there. He also says that I was trying to make it look like he was trying to answer the why question. Presumably, he means something like the question, why does the universe exist? Now let's review some of the statements Professor Anton made in his Why I Am Not an Atheist video, and see if I had any justification for understanding his video the way that I did. In Why I Am Not an Atheist, Professor Anton says that the question, why is there something instead of nothing, is a valid question, one whose validity is so apparent that it is a deficiency on the part of atheists that they don't recognize its validity. Now I guess I'll have to plead guilty for assuming that when someone asks a why question, the validity of the question rests in large part on, at the very least, the theoretical possibility that the question can be answered, and that the person asking the question thinks it is at least potentially answerable. My assumption notwithstanding, all I was suggesting by using the Russell-Eskimo analogy was that there is no room left for asking why there is something instead of nothing once you recognize that the proper approach to asking questions about existence is to ask questions about existence and not to ask questions about existence as such. Along these lines, it has to be said that when physicists tell us that they can describe and explain the general evolution of the universe since the instant after the Big Bang, then the trajectory of explanation belongs to questions about existence and their relationships, and not totalizing questions like, why is there something instead of nothing? Another question that Professor Anton recognized in Why I Am Not an Atheist as valid was, quote, and this is his question, where did all this stuff come from and why are we here? End of quote. That is not significantly different in kind from the question asked by Tom in the Eskimo analogy, but why are all the Eskimos here in New York City? Why is the totality of these three Eskimos here in New York City? In any case, the question, where did all this stuff come from and why are we here, has an undeniable totalizing quality. In Why I Am Not an Atheist, Professor Anton also said that he believes in a neo-Stoic position in which there is a divine logos that is ordering the cosmos right now. He says, and I quote, "The divine logos is an innumerable number of tensions and counterbalancing tensions that are being resolved in some way." End of quote. Now, if this divine logos was simply a sacralized image for the workings of the universe or matter, if in short he was advocating a kind of pantheism, then I would still have disagreed with him, but argued my position differently. But in Why I Am Not an Atheist, he explicitly denied that he was advocating any kind of pantheism. Well, then, If this divine logos is not identical to the universe or matter, then it's natural to conclude that it is somehow greater than the universe or matter. That is, some totality of the workings of the universe or matter is greater than the things that are there. Now, although I think I have established good grounds for understanding Professor Anton in the way that I did, I suppose it's possible that I misunderstood him nevertheless. That could be a deficiency on my part, an insufficient degree of intelligence perhaps. It could also be that Professor Anton wasn't very clear about what he intended by asking the questions he asked and making the statements he made in his video, Why I Am Not an Atheist. In any case, in his Truth and Atheist-Theist debate, Professor Anton makes some additional arguments supporting the use of discourses of the sacred. Some of the soft sciences, he says, indicate that humans have a need for ultimate answers to ultimate questions. From this, and perhaps for other reasons, he concludes, and I quote, "People need narratives and myths. The problem is to come up with good ones," end of quote. Now, I don't know what studies Professor Anton is referring to, or if these studies establish a real human need to ask ultimate questions and receive ultimate answers, or if these studies merely establish the prevalence of humans asking and attempting answers to these questions. In any case, I don't need to consult the studies because nothing of any ontological or referential consequence follows even if these studies establish there is a real human need to ask ultimate questions and receive ultimate answers. God does not exist simply because of some flukish need that human needs might have for a God to exist. Likewise, discourses about the sacred don't cease to be ontologically and referentially suspect because of some putative human need to engage in sacred talk. Professor Anton also points out that some of the greatest art, literature, and music were created by people who believed that it would be witnessed by a divine mind. Their belief, he tells us, served them to create. So what? Throughout history, people have been creative, although inspired by a variety of erroneous ideas, and even by appalling ideologies. Professor Anton says, and I quote, "We cannot discover that life is sacred, but it does not follow that life is not sacred," end of quote. Actually, I need to restate that. Professor Anton says, and I quote, "We cannot discover that life is sacred, but it does not follow from that life is not sacred," end of quote. True, that doesn't follow necessarily, but it also doesn't follow that life is sacred. You go with the trajectory of evidence, and I just happen to believe that in our day and age, that the trajectory of evidence and explanation indicates a desacralized conception of life in the universe. Thank you for your attention.